say to defund the police, but we need to stop militarizing the police. We need to stop looking at them as a force to solve all of our problems. The community needs to address the problems themselves, and some of the victims, the communities, the victimized communities, need to be more empowered, whereby some of these issues can be handled before we get the police involved.
When there are concerns about prejudices and biases, we cannot seek to eliminate prejudice against one group of people, that the prejudice is based upon superficial external characteristics, by then replacing it with continued prejudice against another group of people based on superficial external characteristics like occupational choices.
Welcome to When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, John Arthur Fiala. And now joining me are Abraham Hamilton III and Dr. J. Thomas Smith. Mr. Hamilton is the political policy analyst for the American Family Association and on American Family Radio as a regular contributor. Dr. J. Thomas Smith is a lawyer, immigration expert, and local radio host, formerly on 102.1 Magic. And I think we'll be hearing from him shortly soon. How are you today, gentlemen?
I'm doing great.
Doing very well. Thank you for having me, John, and wonderful to meet you, Dr. Smith, as well.
Thank you, Abraham.
Glad to have you both on. So, want to ask you guys a few questions today. I mean, the country seems like it's gone topsy-turvy. Everything is, we're more polarized and divided today, I think, than we ever have been as a nation, or at least certainly in my short lifetime. It seems to become, it's running towards a fever pitch. So, kind of want to throw some questions by y'all. You both have some interesting backgrounds. We'll start off with Mr. Hamilton. I want to ask you, what's your opinion on the whole George Floyd scenario? What do you think? I mean, is there any question as to what should be done with Derek Chauvin? Is that a divisive issue, or is there something else that people are really getting at? Is there an undertone there that we should be looking at?
Well, I think it's pretty clear based on the video that almost every American at this point has seen circulating in our country. I'm usually one of the people who would say that we need to get all of the information, we need to get all of the facts before we come to a conclusion. But witnessing the video that lasts over 10 minutes in total, that depicts Derek Chauvin plunging his knee into the back of Mr. George Floyd's neck as he is laying face down, prone on the side of the street with his hands cuffed behind him, I think it is evident from that video that Derek Chauvin committed murder before all of the American people, for all of the American people to see. I think the police officers who were present on the scene, although the video doesn't depict this, photos that were released later showed that at various points there were up to 3 officers all on Mr. Floyd at one time. There are no factual circumstances that would suggest that what we all witnessed would be a justifiable use of force by the police officers. The video is long enough where we can see that there were no risks to the officers' lives or safety when Derek Chauvin was plunging his knee into the back of George Floyd's neck. We know that even by the body posture of Derek Chauvin himself, having tucked his own hands in his pocket. We have all witnessed murder, and I think that the country, for a change, was pretty close to unanimous in agreement that what we witnessed was murder. So I think that was a harrowing sight for all of us to see, and it is something we are grappling with as a nation at this moment.
So my next question would be, why aren't we uniting around this? I mean, it seems to me as though this has become, it seems like everyone's in agreement that this officer committed a vile act of brutality. Dr. Smith, what would be your impression as to why this is divisive?
Tribalism. Basically, I mean, the answer is very, very obvious in that regard.
Well, my immediate thought would be, and I don't have these stats in front of me, but my immediate thought would be,
when it comes to the police or any of our social issues, either you with us or you're against us. So if you're against the idea of, in other words, this is what we stand for. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? One thing that's very notable is that in all of the history of Minnesota, they have never convicted a white police officer for killing an African American in the whole history. In fact, this might be the only case of which they're prosecuting. But for the fact that we witnessed it, we would have heard a story about how he resisted a furtive move. We saw a shiny object. We feared for our life. The standard stories that they typically tell when an African American dies in custody at the hands of the police. There's always something that he or she did to cause their demise. In this case, question what happened, but the issue that we're going to have when it comes to prosecuting this case, for example, one of the attorneys for one of the gentlemen appeared on a national TV earlier this week and tried to come up with an excuse that the police video, the body cam, and tried to suggest that there was something that he was pumped up with drugs or something, because he was out of control, he was superhuman, and that's why they had to hold him down. He tried to say that his client did not see Chauvin's knee on his neck based on his position. So I'm saying we're going to hear these things appear in court, and the challenge we're going to have is whether we'll actually get an honest jury who will be able to base their decision on the facts. That's going to be our challenge, the country's challenge. Our eyes are lying to us, and a jury finds that he's not culpable in this situation. What we've seen so far is going to be, I think it's going to be mild compared to the consequences.
So I want to jump in there. You bring up some interesting points. I want to ask Mr. Hamilton what his opinion is on some of the stuff that you brought out there. You were saying that this is the only, or rather this is likely the only prosecuted case of a white cop on black African American killing. You know, there were only, last year, approximately 10 unarmed incidents. I'd like to throw this one to
in the last 10
was
years.
it 11? Okay. 11 deaths in Minneapolis.
Correct.
So I'll go ahead and throw this over to Mr. Hamilton to respond.
What am I responding to? The audio kind of cut out a little bit.
I apologize. So the concept that this is a common occurrence and it's happened 11 times in Minneapolis is what I'm hearing. I beg your pardon?
Did he say 11 times over the last 10 years?
Over the last 10 years. I mean, to me, that sounds like a,
correct.
Well, I'd like to get your response, Mr. Hamilton. Go ahead and reiterate the point, Doctor, if you need to.
Yes, deaths by of African Americans at the hands of the police in Minnesota. I want to say in the last 10 years, and there have been no prosecutions.
Okay.
Your thoughts, Mr. Hamilton?
There was a prosecution where
police contacts that Minneapolis police officers have had, or Minnesota police officers have had with melanated people in Minnesota over that same time period. Because if the Minnesota statistics are similar to the national statistics, where there are over 375 million contacts with American citizens annually, and in 2019, there were a total of 9 melanated, described as unarmed black men that were killed. It shows that that were fatally killed. That it's a very low number. Now, let me say this very clearly: any loss of life is a tragedy. First and foremost, because every single human being, regardless of their walk of life, regardless of what they've done with their lives, are made in the image and likeness of God. So I want to say that unequivocally up front. But something that I am concerned about, as a young man, I grew up in the hood in New Orleans. I grew up born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. And there's this current animus toward the police officers. And one of the things that is a glaring concern for me with, for example, the Minnesota City Council's move to defund the police and things of that nature, that the people that would be most victimized by these types of things are going to be the people that are most vulnerable. And so in this moment, I don't find it prudent to make rash decisions like defunding the police officers in a moment of fervor, in a moment of furor, where emotions are high. I think there needs to be a calm and deliberate approach to whatever reforms that legislators, municipal officials, whoever believe may be necessary. But it is not prudent, in my estimation, to completely remove or disband police units and police departments because of in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And I would add this to the conversation. I highly doubt that this is the cry that are coming from the people in these neighborhoods. I am concerned that there are nefarious actors that are taking advantage of George Floyd's murder to advance a nefarious agenda that has no concern and nothing to do with the people in these communities that are crying out. Case in point, following George Floyd's murder, there have been numerous people, including melanated people, David Dorn in St. Louis, Patrick Underwood in Oakland, who have also been murdered in the outcry. But we don't see nearly as much attention focused there because I think people are attempting to hijack George Floyd's murder in order to advance an agenda that has nothing to do with the people in these communities that are being governed by municipal authorities.
So that brings me to an interesting question. I want to ask you both. We had riots. There were protests and there were riots, right? There's this question of where does that line fall and who was whom. I think there were legitimately people who were protesting the unjust death of George Floyd, but there are folks who are saying that the riots were done by protesters. I heard one commentator say this was a scream of primal pain. I find that insulting. Personally, I find that insulting to everyone involved. Were these protesters or were these cultural Marxists? What's the deal, Dr. Smith? Give me your short on that, and then I'd like to get Mr. Hamilton's opinion.
Okay, first of all, I just want to touch on a couple of things Mr. Hamilton brought up. He refers to Black people and Hispanic people as melanated people. I just want to make sure the listening audience understands, because I've never heard anybody use the term melanated people when it comes to someone being murdered by the police. So so melanated people, I assume you mean Black people, Africans, or Mexicans, Hispanics, or anybody else who is not Caucasian. Is that what you mean?
I mean people that whose right? Skin color reflects a higher level of melanin in their bodies.
You mean Black people?
Including Black people, yes.
You don't mean white people, right? I say you don't mean white people, right? You say including Black people. Black people are the main victims. So we're talking about African Americans. It sounds like you're trying to make as serious as it is. We don't want to wash over this. And you make reference to the fact that the percentage, only 11 Black people, are saying that based on the percentage of people they come into contact with, that's a very small number. But I would ask how many white people are not in Minnesota?
The audio broke up again. You would ask how many what?
White people have been murdered at the hands of the police in Minneapolis that you know of.
I don't have the specific statistics for
or died. Right.
Yeah, right. I have those statistics for the entire country. There were.
No, we're speaking about that particular situation. My point is that this does not typically happen to a non-melanated. Typically happens to melanated people, as you put it. It doesn't happen to white people.
That's factually inaccurate. That's factually inaccurate. Every year there are more, as you call them, white people that are killed in America than Black people every year. More every year.
At the hands of the police.
Yeah.
Okay,
In
but
per
re-
that's something that,
per interaction with the police, officers, and maybe this is a good thing, maybe this is a bad thing, but officers are significantly less likely to use lethal force with a melanated person than they are a white person. Now, that's just statistically. I won't deny the fact that there are racists in this world, and
Nor
some of
will
them
I.
have made it onto police forces, right? Some of them have made it onto the police force, and those people need to be dealt with as we find them. However, the I don't have the statistic in front of me. I apologize, but it is a significantly higher likelihood per encounter.
Like, yeah, I'll just tell you, in 2019, there were 1,004 people who were killed at the hands of police officers last year. 235 of them were black. 769 of them were not black. So to assert that it's only happening to black people, that's just factually inaccurate. That does not mean that there
no,
aren't people who harbor
no,
biases.
no, I didn't say it only happened to black people.
No, you
I'm
said it doesn't
saying
happen to
that
white people. That's what you said.
I was talking Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minneapolis, Minnesota was the question. There was one where a black police officer accident was okay.
I,
That was that one.
I think we're getting bogged down in a
Right?
little bit of the minutia.
We are a little bit. Let's deal with statistics that we have where we can compare apples to apples. And by the way, Minneapolis, that department, I firmly believe that it needs to be looked at because Derek Chauvin had multiple very negative encounters with
17.
yeah. I mean, we're talking an officer who should have been booted a long time ago. There, in a lot of police departments have a three strike sort of situation, or even harsher. One bad encounter and an officer's on notice. And I think that's the way it should be. Police have a hard job. I have a lot of respect for the badge and those who wear it. However, they're held to a very, very high standard, and they need to be. They're holding our lives in their hands.
Yes, I agree. I support the police, but supporting the police includes holding them accountable, calling out brutality when it occurs, and when they violate the law, they need to be held accountable. And supporting the police requires that. I'm an attorney. Dr. Smith is an attorney. I'm pretty sure you've heard the scores of attorney jokes like I have about lawyers being liars and things of that nature. Well, I take it upon myself to make sure I'm not one of those types of attorneys. And if I ever become aware of someone taking advantage of people because of that, I'm not going to wait for somebody else to speak up. I'm going to speak up. The same should be true.
I think we're obligated to do that. I might point out that my family is in law enforcement. I have one uncle that served the police department for 40 years. I have a cousin that's been in the police. My sister's a police officer. So, it's something I have a high respect for police also. And as the point you brought up before, that's not going to happen. And I don't believe that any reasonable person, it's not going to happen. I'm thinking what the idea is that some of the funding that's going to the police should be going to programs to minimize or reduce the need of police. While working at doing involuntary commitments at Ben Taub Hospital here in Houston, typically police a person with a mental health issue into the hospital to the emergency room, and we'd have to triage that patient. They should. A police officer doesn't need a gun and a taser and all of that to pick up someone with a mental health issue. If we had more money going into the mental health arena, we'd have a need for police officers to be dealing with those situations. And there are other situations like that where the not be used in that regard.
So there's a real conversation to be had about mental health in the United States. We look at everything from shooters to some of our police officers. I mean, some of these guys deal with PTSD, and there's a real conversation to be had there. But that's probably not for the scope of today. Want to go ahead and just get your quick opinions, both of you. We're running up on our time here. what are the solutions to the divide that Americans face today? Our nation's polarized. Dr. Smith, I want to get your response, and then I'd like to get Mr. Hamilton's to close out.
Well, I think there are a number of issues here. As a community, we do have issues with police, education, voting, health, employment, just to name a few. Some of the solutions would be, I think, not to defund the police, but we need to stop militarizing the police. We need to stop looking at them as a force to solve all of our problems. The community needs to address the problems themselves, and some of the victims, the victimized communities need to be more empowered, whereby some of these issues can be handled before we get the police involved. If you have a friend that's about to drive drunk, you're not going to turn him over to the police, but at the same time, you would try to stop him from committing. I think more of that needs to happen in the community, and of course,
absolutely. And we definitely need to have a conversation about over militarizing the police. Before Black Lives Matter became a big conversation, we were talking about demilitarizing the police, but again, different conversation for a different day maybe. Mr. Hamilton, your thoughts. What's the solution to the divide Americans face in our culture?
Well, the issues that Dr. Smith mentioned about policing, about education, I would add into their barriers to entrepreneurship. All of these things are governed on the local level. I think by focusing our attention to the federal level, we allow ourselves to be distracted from the most immediate source of government interaction in our lives. In many of these cities where they're the most vehement outcries, you have, I would say, uni-party rule for 50, 60, in my hometown of New Orleans, over a century. But these people are never held accountable for these things. And I would add, when there are concerns about prejudices and biases, we cannot seek to eliminate prejudice against one group of people that the prejudice is based upon superficial external characteristics by then replacing it with continued prejudice against another group of people based on superficial external characteristics like occupational choices. I think it's unhelpful for people to say everything is always based in skin color-based partiality, racism, and it's not helpful either to say that it never happens. I think that we need to move to the place to where we as a nation get to the place where we recognize that people are people, and that superficial analysis and evaluations and prejudices cannot be supplanted if we just transition the direction of superficial prejudices and biases.
Well, I appreciate both of you being on. This has been an honor and a privilege. Hope to have you back on again. Thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you too, Dr. Smith.
If you enjoyed that conversation, let us know. Tweet us at Opinions Collide. There's not enough characters on Twitter for at When Opinions Collide, so tweet us at Opinions Collide, and let us know what you thought. If you liked it, if you hated it, if you're offended, great. If you loved it, great. Tell us why. This show's all about getting both sides together and having a chat. Pretend it's that awkward conversation at Thanksgiving. Thank you for listening. If you're on the radio, you're at 1540 AM or 101.7. And if you're listening to the Edge Radio podcast, go ahead and hit us a like and a share and a subscribe. And if you're on the When Opinions Collide podcast, same thing there. Let us know who we should have on next. This is going to be a fun ride together. Looking forward to many more of these conversations. And tell us what topic should we tackle on our next episode. We've got another vaccine show, and we're working on some other fun stuff, but let us know. Thank you for listening to the Edge Radio Network and When Opinions Collide.